You know, I never know what to make of this claim that I'm so young. I've been out of diapers for 30 years, and so I feel pretty... This conference right here is the Washington establishment's worst nightmare. And it is our job to make sure that the Washington establishment doesn't have a good night's sleep from now until the time that they leave Washington, D.C. And let me be clear, the reason I say they leave Washington, D.C. is it's not just the elected officials that we need to get voted out of office. It is the bureaucrats, and it is the staffers who have been in Washington, D.C. for 45 years and say, well, we can't do that conservative idea because LBJ didn't teach me to do it that way. We are big fans of RedState.com at Heritage Action. I think all of us know that D.C. is broken. It's not just broken because we have a liberal ideologue who's in over his head in the White House. It's broken because of the establishment. It's broken because of a Congress that isn't doing its job. And the only solution to the situation we have in Washington is active citizens who are keeping Washington accountable, who are holding their politicians' feet to the fire. RedState.com is the leading place that happens. So thank you all for what you're doing. It's also great to be in South Carolina. I think Nikki Haley is one of the most inspiring politicians that we have in this country. We heard that this morning. But I also want to talk about their congressional delegation. You have 5 Republicans in the House from this state who are amongst the best congressmen we have in Washington, D.C. right now. Eric referenced the scorecard that we're doing, and I'm not supposed to talk about it. We're publicly releasing it in 10 days, but let me lift the lid on it for a second. And first of all, you would not believe the crying and the gnashing of the teeth that happens in Washington, D.C. when you do a scorecard. You may remember back in February that the House passed H.R. 1, which was a historic spending cut of $61 billion out of a $1.6 trillion deficit. And in addition to H.R. 1, which passed the House and every Republican voted for, there were 23 amendments that were voted upon to cut spending further. Let's take spending back to 2006, Mick Mulvaney from South Carolina said. Let's defund the Legal Services Corporation, somebody said. And so we put out a report card on those votes. And we simply said, here's the percentage of those 23 votes to further cut spending that each member of the House voted for. The wailing that we endured from Washington establishment politicians is indescribable. We had one politician who said, how could you give me a 53%? I said, sir, we didn't give you a 53%. You voted for 53% of them, and we just pointed it out. He looked at me like I said the moon was made out of cheese. The man did not understand what was being said. We're doing a scorecard. We're releasing it in 10 days. And we don't grade on a curve. We're conservatives. We are not tenured professors. It turns out there are only 26 members of the House of Representatives, 26 out of 435 who get over an 85% on our scorecard. All 5 of the South Carolina Republicans are in that group. And I should also say Senator Everett Dirksen many years ago said that there are 2 parties in Washington. There is an evil party and a stupid party. And occasionally the evil party and the stupid party get together and do something together that is both evil and stupid, and they call that bipartisanship. All 5 of the South Carolina Republicans voted against the evil and stupid plan that came out of Washington 10 days ago with the debt limit. But I'll be honest, I'm not here to suck up to politicians. I'm here to thank you. If any of us had thin skin the last month, really the last year, frankly, our entire lives as principled conservatives would have been really tough. Just in the last few weeks, we've been disparaged as hobbits. We've been told our refusal to go along to get along is self-indulgence masquerading as principle, sectarianism masquerading as conservatism. An unnamed congressional staffer on the Republican side told a newspaper there was nothing these far-right guys would say yes to. Note that these are the far-right guys in the House who passed the Ryan budget and who passed the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, both of which the President of the United States and the Senate refused to do anything about. There is nothing that these far-right guys would say yes to. It is clear they were going to be intransigent no matter what. Conservatives were ultimately told to quit whining and get our asses in line. All from people who are supposedly on our side of the fight. And I want to say it would have been very easy to buckle under this pressure. It would have been very easy to bend. It would have been very easy to break. But every single one of you in this room, redstate.com, a lot of the conservative groups in Washington, we all stood tall, and I admire you, and I thank you for that commitment to principle. Now, let's be very clear. There's a bipartisan political establishment in Washington that thrives on the consolidation of power in the federal government and the granting of benefits to its supporters in labor unions, in big business, and among the so-called elite. As conservatives, we may wish we could all stay away from politics, that we could focus on our families and our faiths, on our careers and our communities. But alas, our country is at a tipping point now, and it will only be saved by staying actively engaged, holding Washington accountable, and telling the Washington establishment that they need to get their asses in line. This is what we're trying to do at Heritage Action. This is what redstate.com is trying to do, and I wanted to come here and thank you for your patriotic engagement in our nation's future. I also want to describe 5 diseases that afflict Washington, D.C., that are the reason that this country is heading down the path it is. First of all, there is a team mentality in Washington that says there are only 2 teams in this nation. There is a red team and a blue team, and every citizen needs to pick their team and they need to salute. My party, right or wrong. And this is a premise that is increasingly foreign in a country where more Americans than ever fail to identify with either party. But for those of you who remember the Bush years, this is what got us into some of the messes that we got in there. The President of the United States didn't use his veto pen for the first 6 years of his administration. And I'll tell you, I was at the Heritage Foundation at the time. We'd go to the White House and we'd say, sir, if you need pens, we will send you a truckload. Why have you not vetoed a bill? And these Republicans would actually explain it as if this was something that made sense. They said, you don't understand. The President and Denny, they get in a room before anything is passed through the House, and they're on the same team, and so they agree what the legislation will be so that the President never has to be in the situation where he says no to the Republican Congress. In essence, the President of the United States and the Republican leadership in the House in the early 2000s decided that the constitutional principle of separation of powers, of the clash that needs to happen between the legislative branch and the executive branch, was going to be subservient to a team mentality that overtook Washington at the time. This is the philosophy that gave us out-of-control spending. This is the philosophy that gave us No Child Left Behind. This is the policy, this is the concept that gave us Medicare Part D. Second, we have a Congress that has completely given up its constitutional power to legislate and handed it over to unelected bureaucrats who can make tough decisions and not have to be held accountable at the ballot box. We're in a state right now that has seen that with the NLRB. All of us have seen that when President Obama couldn't get his cap and tax plan through the Congress, that he decided he was going to try to get the EPA to enforce it. All of us have seen it with Obamacare, which was thousands of pages of legislation, is now literally hundreds of thousands of pages of regulation that are being written by Washington bureaucrats. Third is the elevation of an establishment, a bipartisan establishment, of campaign donors, big business, labor unions, the so-called elites, who have been elevated above the constituents and the entrepreneurs and the small businessmen who are actually the people who send politicians to Washington. We saw with the auto bailout, where you had labor unions taking care of the hardworking Americans who put their money to work, investing in those companies, were given the short end of the stick. We see it with campaign finance reform. All you need to ask John McCain about campaign finance reform is, are the labor unions, the big donors to politicians, are the labor unions treated the same way as every single one of us? And the answer is no, because the labor unions are part of the establishment. Politicians are part of the establishment, and they pass their laws at the expense of all of us. The fourth is the rise of a technocratic wonk class that sets baselines that make absolutely no sense to any of us who exist in the real world and mess up the incentives that people have when they pass legislation. You have a system in Washington where the Congressional Budget Office scores as allegedly the largest spending cut in history, the CR that we passed in April, despite the fact that spending went up this year. That doesn't make any sense. You have only a Washington politician could say that because the debt is only going up by $7 trillion in the next 10 years, as opposed to $8 trillion, we've done historic spending cuts that we can all go back and salute. I will say on this, none of that would be possible if we had a media that truly fought for the truth rather than the horse race. You know, I hear stories of a media that once was committed to principle and was actually aggressive in checking the influence